Hey, good day, Loveland, and God bless you. Look, we want you to put those hands together and just join in this praise and worship with us today, because this is the day, this is the moment, this is the time that God has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. If you believe in that, I need you to put those hands together and join in with us. Come on. Hey. Water you turn into wine. Open the eyes of the blind. There's no one like you. There's none like you. Ha. Into the darkness you shine, and out of the ashes we rise. There's no one like you. Ha. There's none like you. If you know it, I need you to lift it up with us. Say, our God, hey, our God is greater.
Our God is strong.
Lord, you are higher.
look for in a friend? And what type of people do you tend to avoid? Let me ask you, when people leave your presence, how do they feel? And finally, what kind of friend are you? Are you a friend that brings healing? Are you a supportive friend? Are you a friend that just is an encourager? Or are you one of those people that we call toxic friends that just bring a whole lot of drama with them to the friendship? Well, this is what we're going to talk about this week on The Living Room. I invite you to join us and be part of our virtual audience. And if you would like that, you can call the number at the bottom of our screen. So we'll give you a passcode, meeting ID. We'll see you on Wednesday as we talk about friendship.
From professional athletes to entertainment celebrities and members of churches across the country, it's been my joy to be a counselor on marriage and romance. And some of those great stories of relationships have been exciting. Some have been beautiful, fairy tale-like experiences. Some of them have been very dramatic. Some have been violent. Some have been happily ever after. And some have been, I hope he don't follow after. It's been quite an experience. And what we've written in this book are some of those exciting stories.
The Lord is my light and salvation. The Lord is my light and salvation. Whom shall I fear?
To me, come on and put those hands together wherever you are. We're gonna lift it up again, and we're gonna say, oh how wondrous, say,
Oh, how wonderful
is the name,
is the name of the
how we
Lord.
worship.
How we worship.
His name is to be
His name
adored.
is to
God our Maker
God our Maker.
endured pain
Endured pain, guilt,
so
and
that
strife,
we
so that we
access our Eve.
access our eternal life.
Come on and put those hands together. This is what we're gonna do. We're gonna offer sincere praise to the Father. I need you to lift your voice and say it. Say, we offer sincere praise. We stand and bless your holy name. Your blood has loosed all our chains. All men shall proclaim there's power in your name. How we love you. 'Cause your name is so sweet.
Your name is so sweet.
And your joy is complete.
Your joy is
Say we love you.
love you.
And we reverence your face today. We
reverence your
in this holy place.
In this holy place.
Jehovah Jireh.
Jehovah Jireh.
He who provides for us all.
Provides
A strong tower. Who hears and moves. Elohim. Created us. From the dust, Jehovah Shammah. The Lord is present with us. Hey, we're gonna sing that again. Say it. Jehovah Jireh. He who provides. A strong tower. Who hears and moves. Elohim. Created us. From the dust, Jehovah Shammah. The Lord is present with us. Hey, I know that's right. I know he's present with me. Is he present with you today? Come on, let's sing that part. We offer sincere praise. We offer sincere praise. We stand and bless
your holy name.
'cause your blood
Has loosed all our chains. All men shall proclaim
There's power.
there's power in your name. How we love you.
'Cause your name is so sweet.
Your
Yeah.
name is so sweet.
Your joy is complete. We love you.
Love you.
And we reverence your face
We
today.
reverence your
In this holy place.
In this holy
Say we
place.
love you. 'Cause your name is so sweet. Yeah.
Your name is so sweet.
Your joy.
Your joy is
And we love you.
love you.
Come on, is anybody gonna reverence his face? Lift those hands and say it.
Reverence your
In this holy place.
In this holy
Come on,
place.
say, oh how wonderful
Oh, how wonderful
is the name.
is the name of the Lord.
Can you join in and sing that with us today? Oh how wondrous, say,
Oh, how wonderful
is the name.
is the name of the Lord.
Yes it is. Can you say it with us? Come on, say, oh how
Oh,
wondrous
how wonderful
is the name.
is the name
of the Lord. Yeah, yeah, say, hey, oh, how wondrous is the name of the Lord. We're gonna break it up right here, and we're gonna sing our parts. Come on, Susan, sing this with me. Oh, how wondrous is the name of the Lord. Come on and sing it with us. Say it. Say, oh, how wondrous is the name of the Lord. We're gonna take it up right here. Oh, say, oh, how wondrous is the name of the Lord. Yes, it is. I need you to lift that up with us today. Say, oh, how wondrous is the name of the Lord. I need everybody in one big voice to say it with us. Oh, how wondrous. Say, oh, how wondrous. 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 Oh, how holy. 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 Say, oh, how holy. 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 He's so worthy. 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 Say, he's so worthy. 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 Say, how we love. 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 Say, how we love. 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 Sing, oh, how wondrous is the name of the Lord. Give God some praise today. Woo! Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
Well, welcome to Wednesday Night Bible Study, when God asks a question. And these are the questions that Jesus asked throughout the Gospels. But before we get started, I'm going to tell you something that a pastor that is following Jesus would never tell you to do. And here's what it is. Look out for number one.
Listen to me, okay? This is for you, not for me. You look out for yourself. You look out for number one, okay?
I mean, that is the American motto, right? Look out for yourself. And it's a message that the church has condemned. I mean, every Jesus follower knows that we should never have a me-first mentality. We always teach about living sacrificially rather than being self-serving. We talk about finding ways to give to others. We studied in the book of Philippians, do nothing out of selfish ambition and vain conceit. We should always look to put others first and not ourselves, right? What if I told you that that's not always true? What if I told you that there's one area where you must put yourself first? Are you surprised? Well, this is an important area if you're going to walk closely with God and closely with other people. And we'll get into that in a few minutes, but first, let's get to our questions that we start with each week. Our habit during this series, when God asks a question, has been to start out with a couple of questions from Gregory Stock's book, The Book of Questions. Two things. These questions were selected through the blood, sweat, and tears of my friend Steve. So, If you don't like these questions, it's not my fault. You have to blame Steve. Now remember, these are just questions that will help you drill down on your values. They'll help you to get you to know the you that you don't always know about, or maybe the you that you don't always admit to. But remember, make them fun. They're not intended to be serious. Look, this session is recorded, so those questions are on the screen, so you can pause the video and think about them for a minute or two. All right, you ready? Here's the first one. If you were able to live to the age of 90 and retain either the body or the mind of a 30-year-old for the last 60 years of your life, which would you want? If for the last 60 years of your life you could have the mind of a 30-year-old or the body of a 30-year-old, which would you want? Second question. You're given a chance to return to any previous point in your life and change a decision you made, but you'll lose everything that has happened since you made that decision. Is there a time that you would return to? If so, what if you could retain the memory of the life that you now have and you're giving up, even though you could never get it back? Today's question that we're going to study comes from Luke chapter 6, verse 39. Again, remember, if you're not familiar with your Bible, that's all right. It's divided into two sections. The front section is the Old Testament. The back section is the New Testament. And the beginning of the New Testament starts with 4 books. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're called the Gospels. Today, we're going to go to Matthew, Mark, Luke, the third Gospel. So it's the third book in the New Testament. So you can turn there to chapter 6. And an interesting thing about these Gospels is that they were written with divine inspiration by men who were eyewitnesses to the life and ministry of Jesus. So this isn't just some good idea that somebody decided to write down. These were eyewitness accounts of the life of Jesus. Today's passage is where Jesus asks this question: can a blind man lead a blind man? I asked one of my grandchildren that question this past weekend. Here's his answer.
So, what happens when a blind man leads a blind man?
Well, they don't really get anywhere because if they're both blind, they don't really know where they're going unless they have a not blind man leading them.
I thought for an 8-year-old, that was a pretty good answer. And Jesus gave a similar answer. We don't give Jesus enough credit for his sense of humor. You see, Jesus could have answered that question the same way my grandson Elijah answered it. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Well, they won't know where they're going, or he might have even said they'll bump into stuff, or they might get lost. But Jesus didn't say any of that. Jesus said that will they not both fall into the ditch? Tell me that's not funny. Now, before I start getting emails, Jesus is not ridiculing blind people. He's simply pointing out the natural challenges that come from having a specific disability. He's painting a word picture in the mind of his listeners. So he's obviously saying you have to be careful who you follow, right? That's obvious. I think that's an obvious truth. I mean, he follows it by saying, when a learner is perfectly trained, he's like his teacher. My friend Steve, who picks the questions for me each week, he owned a roofing company. And he was pretty successful. And he would share with me how he would train his employees when they came to work for him. That he made it clear to new employees there was a certain way that they do things. And you learn to do it the way that I show you. And if you do it the way that I show you, you'll meet our standard of excellence every time. So Jesus is saying, whoever is training you, you will be like them. Is that a scary thought? It might be for you at this moment, huh? I think when you take a look at the whole context of chapter 6, you'll see the bigger picture of what Jesus is trying to say. Let's look at that context. I love Luke chapter 6. Again, the master teacher is blowing people's minds. He's driving them crazy with his teaching. How? By expressing practical, rubber meets the road faith that comes from relationships rather than rules. Did you get that? That Jesus is helping people to see what real faith looks like rather than the faith that they're used to. What do I mean? We live in a world where people do not think about or believe in God's existence or impact on daily living. They divide people into two categories, religious and unreligious. This is going to surprise some of you, but Jesus was the most unreligious leader to ever live. We get to see this in Luke chapter 6. When you see what's happening here and how revolutionary what Jesus was saying really is, you won't be able to sleep tonight. And I don't mean in a bad way. I mean in the way that the implications are so far-reaching that it's going to make your mind race. If what Jesus was saying is true, then what does that mean about all these different areas in my life? When we take a look at Luke chapter 6, the first thing we'll see is that Luke describes two events that happen at the beginning of that chapter. The first is his disciples, while walking through a field, start plucking heads of grain and started to eat them. And the Pharisees, who were the religious types, the legal minds, the religious legal minds of the time, they were the ones that made sure people knew what the law was. They were a little bit like our police. They'd pull you over if you weren't doing something right according to the law. But they were also required to keep the law themselves. So these guys see Jesus' disciples eating the pieces of wheat. And they say to Jesus, hey, wait a minute. What's up with you and your guys? Why are you doing what's unlawful on the Sabbath? For them to pluck grain on the Sabbath was considered work, and they weren't allowed to work on the Sabbath. And then Jesus gives them an example of when David did something that wasn't allowed. A common sense answer that was right in front of them. Now, quick disclaimer, God's answers aren't always common sense answers. Sometimes his answers seem ridiculous to us, but more often than not, the common sense answer is the right answer. But at times, you have to give God some room to speak. Because in 1 Corinthians chapter 2:14, he says that his wisdom is foolishness to us. We go, that does not make sense. But more often than not, the simple answer is the right answer. But sometimes God speaks a word that changes everything, even though it makes no sense to us. The second story also happens on a Sabbath. Jesus is in the synagogue, and a man with a withered hand is there. And this time, the Pharisees, the religious people, are watching, hoping he does something that they think he shouldn't do so that they can accuse him. Here, Luke tells us that Jesus knew what they were thinking. So he tells the guy, hey, Lefty. All right, he didn't call him Lefty. I did that because the passage says that it was his right hand that was withered. All right, that was a terrible joke. Okay. But he says to the man, hey, get up and stand right here. Now, the guy's standing, withered hand and all, in front of everyone. And he said to the religious folks, I just have one question. Is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or evil? To save a life or destroy? Then look at the passage. If you have your Bible, look at verse 10 there in Luke chapter 6. And when he had looked around at them all. Man, do you get you see the picture there? The man with the withered hand is standing right there, and Jesus says, look, is it right to do good or evil on the Sabbath? Is it right to save a life or destroy on the Sabbath? The answer there is pretty obvious. But because he knew what the Pharisees were thinking, look, he stood, and it says he looked at them all to make sure they were getting his point. And then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was restored as whole as the other. Listen to this. Verse 11, if you have your Bibles, it's right there. But they were filled with rage and discussed with one another what they might do to Jesus.
I'm going to get that guy. Who wants to come with me?
Man, nothing makes religious people more mad than when they're ready to pounce and they're blocked by something simple as common sense. But let's start reading at verse 27. Luke 6:27. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who spitefully use you. To him who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And to him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who asks of you. And from him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. And just as you want men to do to you, you also do to them likewise. But if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? For even sinners lend to sinners to receive as much back. All right, here we go. Verse 35. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, hoping for nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the unthankful and the evil. Therefore, be merciful, just as your Father is merciful. There's way too much to unpack in what we just read. Those are months of thoughts and ideas to discuss. But let me give you this, that Jesus is drawing a clear line for us. Following the law was just a path. It was just intended to be a path for following God. But laws and rules are dead if their interpretation doesn't consider the outcomes. It then gets rid of all the relationship between the heart of the lawgiver and the law. It becomes dead religion. What do I mean by that? I'll explain it like this. In our step 1 class, we say this: religion is man's effort to get to God. Good works, giving, religious practices like going to church, watching Bible study online, praying, fasting, etc. Stuff like that, things that we do. But when Jesus arrived on the scene, there was no limits to how many religious practices and organizations were operating. By that I mean there were all kinds of religions and all kinds of practices going on all over the Middle East. Wherever you went, there were gods and religious practices. Then Jesus turned this entire religion thing upside down. How did he do that? One, it was no longer you or me trying to get to God. We couldn't. We tried. We tried to do it right. We tried to follow the rules. Then we looked at the rules and we said, wow, I can't do this. If you've ever tried to read the Bible, the 10 Commandments, and then walked away feeling like, wow, I can't do this. I keep messing up. Good. That's the purpose of the law. The law has fulfilled its purpose if you threw up your hands and said, I can't do this. The law isn't there to make you perfect. The law is there to show you that you're not. The law is there to show me that I'm not. And when we get to that place, it's then we can say, then how do I meet God's standard of perfection? If the law says this is it and I can't do it, now what? You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. I've sinned. Look, I need, in the verse that we just read, mercy. You know what mercy is? Mercy is when you don't give someone what they earned or what they deserved. When you were a little kid, did you ever get in a fight? A friend of yours did something really mean. I guess it wasn't a friend. Someone did something really mean to you, and you retaliated. But then there may have been a time where someone did something terrible to you, and you could have got them. You really could have, and you decided not to. You held back what they earned, what they deserved. That's mercy. Some of us didn't have merciful fathers. Actually, we may have had merciless fathers. I know some people whose dads were rough, hard men. And if your dad was like that, it may have impacted not only the way you look at fathers, not only the way you look at the world, but at the way you look at God. Our fathers may not have taught us how to be merciful. So if someone messes up, that's it. I'm done with them. I don't even know if I should tell this story, but I will. Many years ago, long before I married Rose, I dated a woman for a while, and she was pretty. She was smart. I really liked almost everything about this woman, except for one thing. When she got mad, she was merciless. I mean, merciless. And I hadn't experienced it. It wasn't directed at me, but I got to see it with her friends and her family and her coworkers. If they crossed her, she was on a mission to teach them a lesson. I mean, she was mean. Like the Pharisees, filled with rage, and tried to figure out what they might do to get whoever made them mad. Her and I, we had talked about it multiple times. We talked about all the other options that were available other than teaching them a lesson. But it always came down to vengeance and causing them pain and teaching them a lesson. Here's what this shows us. That when we see our own brokenness, when we see our own failures, our own pain, and we see what God could have done to us, probably should have done to us, but instead was merciful, it changes you. When you recognize that, it changes you. You no longer look for opportunities to stick the knife in and twist it. You withhold your wrath because you're so grateful that God withheld his wrath from you. And it's not, get this, it's not that you're doing it so that he won't release his wrath on you. You're doing it because you're so appreciative that he didn't. That I know what it feels like for someone to have mercy on me, and I need to have mercy on someone else. But here's the thing. God's mercy isn't enough. It wasn't enough that he just held back his wrath. And usually with our family and friends and people that we're dealing with and we're being merciful, usually it's not enough that we just hold back our wrath. Because that doesn't fix anything. That's why you hear about God's mercy and grace. The biblical term grace, it just simply means unmerited favor. But that's normal grace. You see, God's grace is supernatural, so it's unmerited favor to his enemies. Did you see it there in the verses that we read? Luke 6:33. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. Did you see the mercy and the grace in there? Especially the grace? Because, look, it's easy to do good to someone who does good to you. But the challenge is when someone makes you mad and when someone hurts you, can you do good for them then? And if you lend to those whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? Look, this is my personal policy. Anybody that knows or that has had this experience with me knows it. I do not lend money to people. I just don't. If I have it and they need it and I recognize their need, I try to give it to them. Now, that doesn't mean they can't give it back if they choose to at a later point, but Proverbs tells us that the borrower becomes slave to the lender, that when you borrow money from people, it changes the relationship. And, there's a movie, The Bronx Tale. I really like the movie, and a gangster is teaching a young guy kind of the ropes of the streets, and the young guy sees this guy who owes him $5, and he yells, he goes, "Hey, man, where's my $5?" And the guy runs away. And he goes to chase him, and the gangster calls the guy back. He goes, "Why are you chasing that guy?" And he says, "Well, he owes me $5, and he's owed it to me for a while, and he hasn't paid me." And he says, "Do you like that guy?" And he goes, "No." He says, "Do you want to be friends with him and see him?" And all? He goes, "Well, no." He said, "Look, then it cost you $5 to get rid of that guy." See, that relationship was changed. Obviously, that's not the example that Jesus wants for us. He doesn't want our heart to be like that. So he says, look, when you lend money from people that you know can pay you back, you haven't done anything that anybody else wouldn't have done. Even the sinners. Verse 35 says, "But love your enemies and do good, and lend, hoping for nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be the sons of the Most High, for he is kind to the unfaithful and the evil." That's hard for us to hear because we don't want to be kind to people who are unfaithful and who hurt us. But that is the only thing that separates us from the way the rest of the world acts. Ephesians 2:8 says this, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast." Look, God's saying, I'm holding back my wrath. Not only am I holding back my wrath, but I'm giving you good stuff. And I want you to know that I'm giving it to you as unmerited favor, that you don't deserve it, you can't work for it, you didn't earn it, so that you can never say, "I worked my way to heaven. I deserve to be here." Now, we get to the passages that we came to see. But we needed to do what we just did to get the context so that we could see the contrast between those who would live by their own merit and that those who would live by God's mercy and his grace. Verse 37 in Luke chapter 6. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Verse 38, give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured to you. Verse 39, and he spoke a parable to them. Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into a ditch? And a disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is perfectly trained will be like his teacher. And why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but do not perceive the plank in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck that is in your eye, when you yourself do not see the plank in your own eye? Hypocrite. First, remove the plank from your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to remove the speck that is in your brother's eye.
I would say that the pot calling the kettle black is not something that we should do.
So, let's end this with two questions. First question, what measure are you using towards people? Go back up to verse 37. Take a look at it. It says, judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. And then he says, give, and it will be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. For the same measure that you use it, it will be measured back to you. Look, verse 37 makes it sound kind of like a quid pro quo thing. You know what that means, right? You do for me, I do for you. Right? So if you do it, then God will forgive you. You forgive, God will forgive. You do good, God will do good. You don't condemn, then God won't condemn. That's not what the passage is saying. That's the reason we went to get the context from the beginning of chapter 6. Because remember where I said you get to put yourself first? You remember that? At the very beginning I said you get to put yourself first. This is where you get to put yourself first. When you judge yourself according to God's standard, there's nothing left to be judged. And when you truly judge yourself, you will truly not even think about judging someone else. Look out for number one. You put yourself first. When it comes to this, you put yourself first. You examine yourself and watch what happens. Verse 38, give and it will be given unto you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you. The reason I've read that verse multiple times is because many of us are used to hearing that verse in the context of the Sunday morning offering. You go to churches and they'll tell you, give and it will be given unto you, pressed down, shaken together, running over. And that's true. I mean, I think biblically that's a principle that you can count on. It's really the idea of sowing and reaping. So that's true, but that's not what Jesus is talking about right here. He's not talking about financial giving in this. He's talking about the way that you judge, the way that you treat, the way that you condemn or don't condemn other people is the way it's going to be done to you. And not just by God, but by other people. When you're gracious, people tend to be more gracious towards you. When you're merciful, people tend to be more merciful to you. Now, that's not a promise because we'll see that people take advantage of believers and they don't always reciprocate those things. But it's like Proverbs 23, and train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That's not a promise that happens every time. I think we all know Christian parents who everything we know about them seem to be that they're good parents. They love their children and they tried to raise them right. They tried to teach them the way of the Lord, and as they got older, they wandered away. Some come back. Some don't. So you know what that means? That can't be a promise. That Proverbs is really a book of observation, not a book of promises, a book of observations. It's the writers, it's Solomon saying, this is how I've seen it works. And it's true. I think we all can attest to those things. But when we get back to Luke 6, that the passage about giving is really about how we treat others. So it's not about money, it's about judgment, condemnation, and forgiveness. Here's a second question. How do you lead people? Here we go, verse 39, the one we've been thinking about all day. And he spoke a parable to them. Can the blind lead the blind? Will they not both fall into the ditch? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone who is perfectly trained will be like his teacher. Verse 41, and why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and do not perceive the plank in your own eye? Here's a question. How do you lead people? And this isn't a pastor question. This is an everybody question. And this isn't even a Christian question, although for us it is. If we're a Jesus follower, this is definitely a question about our faith and how we walk our faith out. But everyone, whether you follow Jesus, believe in Jesus or not, can answer this question. How do you lead people? Do you lead people to be gracious and merciful? Or do you lead people to be hard and cold? You see, leadership's defined by influence, so everyone is a leader. No matter who you are, you have influence over someone. If you're watching this, you probably have influence over your children and your grandchildren. You may be a stay-at-home mom, but you have influence over your children. What are you teaching them? Are they merciful and graceful? Are you headed for a ditch and taking people with you? That verse, although it can be taken as be careful who you follow, that wasn't Jesus' emphasis in the context of chapter 6. The emphasis in the context of chapter 6 is be careful where you lead. So who taught you? Did you have a good teacher? If not, it's not too late. You can find a good teacher, and you can become a good teacher. Because here's the thing. None of us can get away from judging.
Okay, don't judge me.
We have to look and see what's good and what's bad. We have to help people with the things that are weighing them down. But Jesus' exhortation is how we do it. We examine ourselves. We become self-aware. And when we see the need in another person's life, we approach it humbly and gently. Galatians chapter 6, verse 1 says this, "Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted." Did you see the pieces in there? Someone has a problem. It says, you who are spiritual. There's a qualification for dealing with that problem. You have to be spiritual in order to deal with a brother's problem. You hear that? That's what, man, I'm so thankful for our elders. We actually have a Galatians 6 committee. Their whole job is to deal with brokenness within our body. And I don't mean our physical body, I mean our church body. Look, we have people that have problems. I shouldn't even say we have people that have problems. We are people that have problems. And sometimes those problems have to be dealt with. And so we have a Galatians 6 committee. And this committee, their first job isn't to interview people. It isn't to get reports. It isn't to figure out what should be done. Their first job is to look at themselves. That they pray and they say, Lord, I'm really not worthy. I'm not worthy to judge anyone. I see myself and I see the problems in my own life, but you've called me to this. So Lord, help me to help this brother. Help me to help this sister. Help me to help this family as they deal with whatever issue this is. And that we restore them humbly and gently. That's the challenge. Because here's what ends up happening. If you don't do those things, if you aren't self-aware, if you're not able to self-examine yourself, if you're not able to see the plank in your own eye, there is no way you can pick the speck out of anybody else's eye. You can't even get close enough to get the speck if you got a plank sticking out of your own eye. So can the blind lead the blind? Yeah. But Jesus says, won't they both end up in the ditch? So the challenge is to not be blind. So you got to watch out. You got to watch out before you ride in on your high horse. Because what's the end of Galatians 6:1 say? Lest you be tempted. You ride in on your high horse, odds are you're going to fall off of it. So, how are you leading? Let's close here. Here's the bottom line, that when we recognize that God has shown us all mercy and grace, as a result, we become merciful and graceful towards others. And when we do that, we don't lead as blind people, but as well-sighted people following the only one who really knows the way. God bless you tonight. I hope you enjoyed the message, and I hope we see you next week.